Hey guys, Prowl 1701 here, and today we're going to talk about Doctor Who, The Face of the Enemy, an original novel. This was, of course, sent to me by the Flyattractor. This is a big novel. It took me a little while to get through. It feels bigger than it is, being about 281 pages? It's 281 pages. It feels bigger, though. It took me a little while to get through it. This story it's really hard to review. There's a lot going on here, and it's really hard to talk about without getting into spoilers. I'll try to talk about what little bit I can before I get into the spoilers. First off, the Doctor is barely in this. He is gone for most of the story. It's more about companions and events that happen while he's gone. This story is set basically between the Daemons and the Sea Devils when the Master is in prison, because as you can see from the cover, obviously the Master is in the story, Delgado's Master, while he's still locked up between the Daemons and the Sea Devils. So the Doctor is off on an adventure with Joe in a situation where he was supposed to leave in the Tardis and come right back right after he left, but of course this is the third Doctor era, so things don't go according to plan. So he's basically there at the very beginning of the story, and then he shows back up in the last couple pages of the story, like, what happened while I was gone? Other than that, it feels more like a 90s Wilderness Years spinoff. Like Downtime, for example. Stories that have people from the Doctor Who universe but don't really have the Doctor in it. The Brigadier, of course, is in this a lot. Benton is in this. Yates is in this. Even Corporal Bell. Remember Corporal Bell? Corporal Bell is in this. I like the fact they incorporated that. And then we also have a lot of original characters. Like we have a police DI named Boucher, which I wonder if he was named in honor of Chris Boucher, actually, because it's spelled just like that. So we have Boucher there, who's also working a police case related to what's going on. And you run into a few other new characters for the story that are good guys. The antagonist of the story are also original characters to the story. One of them, Miss Kyle, she's really good. I like how well she's written. One of the things I really like about this novelization for The Face of, or I should say, The Face of the Enemy, since it's an actual novel, not a novelization. I'm so used to just, most of the Doctor Who I read are missing episode novelizations or just story novelizations. Is how well the legacy characters are handled here. They, like, Delgado's Master feels like the Master. He feels like Delgado's Master. The way he's written is perfectly executed. I feel like I can mentally picture Delgado's Master taking the actions he takes in this story, using things as a means to an end, and the way he says his line, his dialogue, fits Delgado's Master. It's like the writer, David, has a very good handle on how Delgado's Master works. And he's like this with the other characters. The Brigadier feels like the Brigadier. And it's the good Brigadier. Because for some reason in the show, the Brigadier is written as like really, really thick. Like, say, the Three Doctors. But this is more like the Brigadier's when he's written well. Like in The Invasion and Spearhead from Space and stuff like that. So I like that the Brigadier is written well here. Benton as well. I really like how well he gets Benton across, with Benton being kind of the, he's kind of a nice guy. Everybody likes Benton, and that comes across in this as well. This story actually ties in as a sequel, sort of a sequel to an actual TV episode, but the story does a really good job of not telling you that. It gives you little hints at that, to see if you can, it kind of, the book almost challenges you to figure out at what point you figure out what's going on. It gives you the little hints, and it gives it to you more frequently as the story goes on, to see where in the story you figure out, the little light bulb moment, where you figure out how this connects to another story. Now, I knew what it was going in, because the reason I was sent this is because I was talking about a story, and Flyattractor said, well, actually, there's a sequel to that story, this, and I was like, really? And I'm like, I want to read that, and he's like, I'll send it if you'll review it, and I said, fair enough. So I knew that going in, but I like that I knew that going in because I can see all the little stuff, all the little hints and pieces it drops to make you go, I like that. I like that I'm able to see on first read the little moments where, oh, I see what they're doing. Yes. So that was really neat for me. I'll talk about that more when I get into spoilers. It is an interesting read because this story does not read like any piece of Doctor Who I've ever watched, seen, read. This does not feel like any other piece of Doctor Who I've ever experienced. It is different. It just has a different tone, different feel. Much like how Season 7 has a different tone to it than any of the other Pertwee seasons. It's a little more serious, a little more adult, a little darker perhaps. This is like that. It has a much more serious tone. It's very dark, a bit graphic at times. It does not feel like a family-friendly Doctor Who. It feels more like this is for the adults. You know, it came out in the Wilderness years in '98, I believe. This is for the adults that grew up with Doctor Who as kids. Because, like, some of the deaths are graphic. Some security officers get killed at the beginning in a heist. And the way it describes their deaths, like one of them's brains getting blown out across computer screens, covering the screens. You know, a cop getting shot and killed with blood splattered all over. It's very graphic in how it describes it. It definitely doesn't tonally feel like Doctor Who. Even Season 7 Doctor Who, it's a bit darker. A lot of people get killed. Even characters that the story follows at places get killed. Because the story does not have a central main character. The person that the narrative is following changes frequently. And even with the antagonist, sometimes you're following the antagonist and you're privy to their thoughts. You know, they're the central point of that little chapter, so to speak. So you can get inside the antagonist's mind. Not just the main antagonist, Miss Kyle, but there's like another guy who's kind of the brunt force, the brawn. I forget his name. It begins with a B. But, you know, it follows him sometimes. There's another guy named, like, I can't remember if it's Gary or what it is. It begins with a G. You follow him sometimes. You follow the Master sometimes. And then it cuts back and forth with the protagonist as well. That's another thing. The story does a really good job of, since every few pages it's cutting to a different part of the story, of making you like, oh, I want to know more what's going on here. Like, say I'll be following the Brigadier, and then it cuts to Miss Kyle, but I like the stuff that was going on with the Brigadier, so I'm like, oh, I want to get back to that. I want to know what the next part is. Or I'll have a part with Miss Kyle, and it'll cut to, like, Benton, and I'm like, no, I want to know what's going on with this Miss Kyle. It does a good job of investing you in it. And then, of course, as the story progresses, and we start getting into the final stages of it, even though it's still cutting between characters, it doesn't feel quite like such a shift in story, because by the end, of course, a lot of your characters are in the same place, and they're all caught up in the same events. So you're more just seeing events playing out from different points of view toward the end, and the scope of the story narrows where everybody's kind of centered on the core thing that's going on. But it's a real interesting way to tell a story with it constantly jumping between characters whose inner thoughts and inner monologues you're following. That's pretty fascinating. And found it a pretty good read, actually. This is definitely one of those I'm like, will I reread it? Maybe. I could see myself possibly going through this again. The book did have the issue of seeming longer than it is. I will say that. Even though I enjoyed the read, it took me a while to get through it. And I know one day I really put a lot of time. I had one day where most of what I did was reading. And it seemed like it took me longer to get through it than it usually does a book. Maybe I've just gotten used to the length of the novelizations, which are out of camera range. You can't see them. But the novelizations are considerably shorter. And maybe I've just mentally gotten used to just reading novelizations of existing stories. And since they're considerably shorter, I get through them quicker. It did take me a while to get through this. I'm like, it's almost like it claims it's 281 pages, but like a Tardis, I think it's bigger on the inside. It did take me a while. I will admit, by the time I got through with it, while I enjoyed it, I was kind of glad to be through with it. Well, maybe glad's not the right word, but I was not unhappy to be through with it while still enjoying it. So let's talk about some of the spoilers now. Just I don't think too many people are going to be too many of you are going to be clamoring to go out and find a copy. So I'll get into spoilers. The interesting thing is how this brings in some other legacy characters from Doctor Who. Ian and Barbara show up and are a huge part of this story as well. And it doesn't tell you who they are at first. It just kind of describes them. It's not until a couple pages in, maybe, when they introduce themselves as Ian and Barbara Chesterton. They are married. This, of course, takes place about 10 years after they got back to Earth. They're married. They have a son who's little. I can't remember how old he is, but he's little. He's not really in the story. He's staying with Barbara's sister. And UNIT have brought Ian and Barbara in to kind of help with the situation going on, because they find this mysterious plane crash with a body in it, but the person that the body is supposed to be of is actually still alive, and Barbara goes to talk to him. Then he gets killed. So you have this weird duplication thing going on. Minerals from the plane crash indicate that it's from possibly a different time, which is really interesting. We also have Harry Sullivan coming in. Harry shows up, and again, it kind of describes him before it actually tells you it's him, although I'd kind of picked up and wondered, hey, I wonder if this is Harry. This sounds like it could be Harry, so it actually turned out to be Harry. That's pretty cool. You have people getting replaced with duplicates of themselves, because the story is basically a sequel to Inferno. And some people from the other Earth, the parallel Earth, have survived and found a way to travel over into our Earth. And they're replacing people, because there's not many of them left. Most of the people in the Inferno world, of course, were killed with the events of Inferno, or right after. But some of them, about 200 of them, survived because they were up in like space stations and stuff. And they know they can't save their Earth, so they're trying to escape it and live in our Earth by replacing their doubles. That's a lot of the story. So you constantly run into people getting replaced. Kind of brutal what happens to one of the other story-related characters, where he gets killed and replaced, but luckily they figure out he's been replaced pretty quick. It does this really crazy, well, it's just creepy. Again, very adult Doctor Who, where they kidnap Barbara and make it look like she's been killed. And Ian, of course, they all think Barbara's been killed, and Ian has to deal with that. And it actually goes to a dark place for a couple pages, with Ian not quite sure if he wants to go on, let us say, and having to deal with the mental issues of standing, right by a really tall drop and wondering if he should take a step forward. It's pretty dark. I mean, I guess that's adult-like, and I figure, I understand how much he loves Barbara and thinking she's dead, him not knowing quite how to cope with it. It's just interesting that a Doctor Who story goes there. With, honestly, of all people, the Master having to talk him down. I really love how Delgado is just woven into this story. I really, really love how well this story gets Delgado's Master. And, I'm trying to remember what I was going to say next. I mean, you go to all sorts of different locations. That's another thing. This story has a lot of different tones in it, from like bank heist to like where I feel like there's Perry Mason stuff going on, to going back to the alternate Earth, to finding an alternate version of the Master who actually has a name. I don't like that, because I don't know if this is supposed to be the Master's actual name, which I'm not going to give it to you, because I wouldn't have wanted to have known it. Or whether that's just what he was calling himself at the time. It's basically, they actually run into this alternate version of the Master who's being chained up and connected to stuff through wires against his will. And he's an alternate version of the Master that never became the Master. So he never became who the Master is. He's more like the Doctor, actually. And he actually has a name and all that. It's like the event that happened, or the events that happened that made the Master never happened to this version of him, which is really interesting. I don't really think it needed it, but it's interesting. And of course it gives the Master a name, which I don't like at all. And how even, Ian's asking him, well, did that person exist in this universe? And the Master's like, yes, but he died a very long time ago, which is really neat. So it's nice getting Ian and Barbara and Harry back. It actually ties in with Corporal Bell a lot. She kind of gets used to help the enemies against her will because her brother was kidnapped by them. So they're basically using her as a mole to leak information. She doesn't want to do it. She just kind of has to do it. But it does kind of explain perhaps why we don't see her in later stories, because it might have been the same situation with Mike where maybe they were able to get her like a nice honorable discharge or something. It would explain why she's not there later while still not damaging her character. Because again, she was kind of having to do it against her will because her brother was kidnapped by these people. I do like the people from the other universe and how well they're written. They're written to where I'm like, yep, that comes across kind of like the people from the other universe. So that's pretty interesting. I don't really care for the fact that it's because the Doctor goes there in Inferno that gives them the idea of traveling to this universe, which causes all the problems and people's deaths. I don't like that. Also, I always assume in Inferno the reason the Doctor can't take the parallel universe versions of people back to his universe is because he can't. Because if he does, something will happen. Like maybe both versions of Liz can't exist in the same universe. Maybe it'll be one of those things where the matter cancels out. Big boom, universe gets destroyed. Something. I've always assumed it's not because he morally thinks it's wrong, but because he just can't. Like people would die, stuff would happen. That's always been my headcanon. When they're like, well, take us with you in Inferno. And he's like, no, I couldn't possibly do that. Is because he knows something disastrous will happen if he does. I like that headcanon. And with this story in place, that doesn't quite fit. It sounds more like, no, I'm morally superior and I don't think I could do that. So I don't really like how that fits. Plus, again, it blames all of the events of this story take place because of the Doctor's accident. And I'm kind of sick and tired of Modern Who does this way too much, of the Doctor unintentionally having bad consequences. It happens in classic Who, like, for instance, The Face of Evil. And I'm all right with it happening occasionally, but it happens far too much these days in Modern Who, where is the Doctor traveling around really a good thing? And it just annoys me. So that's kind of more of this here, to where that part just kind of really irks me and annoys me. So, like, I probably wouldn't consider this book canon. Like, in my head canon, I don't think I consider this canon. I think it's a fun little offshoot, a fun little read. But, like, in my head canon, I'm not going to consider it canon. Despite the fact I love how well the legacy characters are handled in it. Especially the Master and the Brigadier. Written so well. It's definitely interesting. I've never experienced a piece of Doctor Who quite like it. It's very dark in places. Some of the deaths in it are just, wow, okay. It's definitely an interesting read. Would I recommend it to people? I don't quite know. I guess it depends. I think some people would like it. I think some people would not like it. It was interesting. It was definitely interesting and different, and tonally different for sure. Yeah, I guess that's my main thoughts on Face of the Enemy. I want to know if you've ever read this story and what you think of it, and from my video, what you would think and whether you would be interested in reading it. Comment down below and let's talk about it. Don't forget to click the like button and the subscribe button. I also have a Patreon if you would like to support me on that. I want to give a shout out to Sam Venning, who joined the Patreon recently at one of the top tier levels. I certainly appreciate having him. Him and I have had some fantastic discussions over the messages recently, and I very much enjoyed that. He's a big Doctor Who fan and a big Blake 7 fan, which, as you know, Blake 7 is definitely growing on me. I'm enjoying it so far. Looking forward to that Series 1 collection box set from Blake 7. I also want to give a shout out to Colin Coney, another top tier patron who's been with me for a long time. I certainly appreciate his support and the support of all of my patrons. I have all that other fun stuff down in the video description. Links to the Patreon, links to the Amazon wishlist, links to the Amazon UK wishlist. Would love to get some more of these standard sets. And my P.O. box is also down there. Check that out. Most importantly, I want a huge thank you to the Flyattractor for sending this. And thank you for watching.